In this video we are going to take a closer look at spending command points now that Zone Nephilim has severely cut their availability both pre and early game. First, we will start with a quick comparison between Zone Nachmund and Nephilim before going through my personal considerations when investing CP pre-game. In the second part, we will then go through the stratagems that I am usually using during the game and some of which I usually pass on. Lastly, there will be a quick wrap up of what has been covered. This episode is inspired by a suggestion that one of my viewers, Your Krutze, no doubt I butchered that name beautifully, left in the comments, so thank you for that.
Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Temmer and I will be guiding you through this video.
As a quick reminder, with Zone Nephilim, the starting command points have been cut in half. This means that for our usual 2000 points game, we now start with 6 command points only, and we also do no longer get one free relic and warlord trait. Instead, we now get 2 CP per turn, 1 in each player's command phase, but I think it is important to consider that this does make CP scarcer overall. For once, the guaranteed CP used to be 19, 12 starting, 5 from rounds, and 2 translated into freebie trait and relic. That amount is now 16, aka 6 starting and 10 from rounds. Second, at least the Nachmund stats have shown that rounds 4 and 5 were far less important, many times not even played out, or at the very least the amount of units still left to benefit from CP has been significantly reduced. I covered these stats more briefly in my Zone Nephilim review, which I linked in the description. The important takeaway here is that command points are now scarcer and our ability to pre-invest has been drastically reduced. This puts the Deathwatch in the unfortunate position that we have both great warlord traits and relics and plenty of good stratagems to burn through. When looking at our competitive Army of Renown list in Zone Nachmund, the starting CP used to be around 8 to 9, which would translate into 5 to 6 pre-game spent CP, again counting the 2 freebies here, aka this would leave us at 0 to 1 CP with the new Nephilim rules. Not that much to work with now, is it? But moving forward, let's have a quick look at how competitive lists have been adjusting to these past few weeks. While the data is of course still limited on this, we could nonetheless see a trend emerging, which is 2 starting CP for Army of Renown lists, which in turn enables to use Specialism Extremis in the first round when going first. As we are barely seeing any successful non-Army of Renown lists nowadays, the data for these is even more limited, but back in July I came across a Dreadnought heavy list going 3-3, which started at 0 CP. That hurts. Anyway, I think the takeaway here is that for the Army of Renown in particular, pre-game CP spending is far more limited now. Personally, while I don't necessarily disagree on 2 CP giving a good balance between pre-spending and still being able to do something properly during the first battle round, I also think that the big plays are now likely to shift towards 1 round later, aka the first battle round is likely not where I want to extremis anyway. Furthermore, I think when you are picking the Long Vigil as a secondary, you are not necessarily in a rush to do so either. As such, my personal takeaway so far is that I can afford to start with 1 CP only, which allows for an emergency transhuman on a big kill team, or a very opportunistic extremist when going second, but otherwise, with my a bit defensive playstyle, I am feeling perfectly fine with doing extremist during round 2 or even 3. So what do I spend these 5 CP on then? The short answer is that in the Deathwatch, we have an amazing collection of warlord traits and relics, and the bad news is that you will now always have to make compromises. Starting with the relics, we are in a way fortunate that Armor of Contempt exists and as a result made our Dominus Aegis relic no longer mandatory, or things would be even worse. For me personally, the Beacon and Chalice and the Tomb of Ectoclades are the current top picks, with the Working being a good addition depending on the meta. As it currently stands, I recommend always taking the Beacon. This is also due to the reason that we really don't want to spend pre-game CP on Teleportarium anymore, and this makes the Beacon the overall winner as far as I'm concerned. I am usually leaving it at a single relic only, but if I had room for a second, I would bring the Tomb, partly because this then also acts as some sort of mini extremis, freeing up CP during the game for other options. Moving on to the Warlord trait, this is where I'm spending 2 CP. During my first games with the new rules, I limited my pick to Nowhere to Hide, because I'm most frequently playing into power armor, but I soon discovered that with the new mission format, we just cannot afford to not take Lord of Deceit and optimize priority. I covered the importance of the Spectre's kill team in pretty much every Zone Nephilim video I released to this day, and the short version is that you want that forward deploy and interfering with the deployment of your opponent, but you also need to be able to pull them back to safety when going second, and or using them for screening the backfield when going for the long witch-shield. As far as optimized priority is concerned, I found that being able to shoot and do actions just plain outperforms Nowhere to Hide, Armor of Contempt or not. There is of course a 2 CP stratagem to do actions, but having to rely on that one during the early turns would really just mess with my already low CP, and I found myself saving this for emergencies. We'll come back to this later. Lastly, on Warlord traits, there are plenty of other good ones, I just don't think that we can afford them anymore over these 2 picks I mentioned. Then moving on to the last category, the chapter command and mandatory character upgrades. For both the Chaplain and the Apothecary, I think that the upgrade plus the corresponding Warlord trait is mandatory, so whenever you are bringing either of these, you want to spend that CP there. While the Apothecary is somewhat niche nowadays, some people run the Judiciar instead. When going for that one, I think the Oathkeeper Warlord trait accessible through Paragon of their chapter is also mandatory, eating up another CP. Ultimately, given that the Chaplain is auto-include in competitive play, you will be spending at least 1 CP here, putting you at 4 CP spent minimum, 5 when taking an Apothecary or a Judiciar, and when taking neither, I think I would bring back the Tomb and just plan for starting with 1 CP as previously mentioned. Now that we have blown through our starting CP, how do things look during the game? For the Army of Renown, I already previously mentioned Specialism Extremis. While it was previously common to use it twice, I personally settled with planning to use it once, usually during turn 2 or 3. That's basically where the whole pre-game CP planning comes back full circle. Should I get the opportunity to use it for a second time, that's a welcome bonus, but I generally don't rely on it. Another good reason to have the Tomb as a backup, by the way. The main issue here is that you want to use Extremis on your big kill teams, preferably at max models, or at least max heavy hitters, in case of the Clangby style Proteus kill team, and the whole delaying CP gain just doesn't play nicely into that. Extremis aside, I'm always mindful of making good use of Transhuman. I think that's a no-brainer, and I like to keep some reserve for command rerolls or even Overwatch. A word on command rerolls though, this is both a blessing and the perfect way to waste CP. I should most likely make a video dedicated to that at some point. Then specifically for the Deathwatch, our fall back and shoot and fall back and charge stratagems can be really useful in the right situations. Same goes for Uncompromising Fire, that's the shoot and do action stratagem, though at 2 CP this is very costly, and I recommend only using this if it really makes a major difference. After all, that's why we took the optimized priority in the first place. Specifically for my kill teams, on my Indomitor, the Grammys exclusive Unyielding in the face of the foe can come in handy, and the Gene-wrought might, while technically available to all primaries, goes best with the aggressors for maximal effect as far as I'm concerned. for the Proteus kill team, we have the Melt the Bomb when including a Vanguard veteran, and keep in mind here that any model in the unit can throw it. This is particularly useful in a Clangby style setup where the Velvets have the heavy thunder hammers and you really don't want them to throw the grenade. Then second and my personal favorite, remember that there is the Black Shield exclusive stratagem, Atonement Through Honor, which lets the entire unit heroically intervene. It's such a handy stratagem and so easily forgotten. Last but not least, with the Spectre's kill team now designated auto-include by yours truly, they can pop Smokescreen, and due to being Phobos, they get access to guerrilla tactics, which I think is one of those stratagems really benefiting from increased late game CP, assuming that you can keep them alive for this long. Speaking of redeployment, in our Army of Renown, we also get Battlefield Teleportation, another great one for later rounds. Now, as I have been going for a while now, one or the other might wonder why I'm not mentioning Brotherhood of Veterans. Ultimately, I think it's too expensive for what it does, and the Army of Renown just does it better. To me personally, it falls a bit into the same category as Uncompromising Fire. If I must use it, it usually means that I either played poorly or that something super important came up. In case of the latter, using it is of course fine, and there can be certain instances where you just really have that 5 CP laying around and you combo Extremis and Brotherhood of Veterans, or you need that one unit to have a different chapter tactics and you spend that 2 CP. Never say never, my point here is simply that I try to play in a way that I don't have to rely on it. And then as a second afterthought, what about our anti-Xenos strats? Like Brotherhood of Veterans, I rarely use them, usually I don't have the CP or don't think that they are worth it. Time for a complete overhaul, GW. Overall, while I think that Zone Nephilim does limit our pre-game CP spending, and with that our toolset, with big plays now more likely to be pushed back by a turn, I believe that we can go as low as 1 starting CP, which still allows for some defensive acts like Transhuman during the first round. While we hardly ever have a shortage of good stuff to spend our CP on, I also think that some Deathwatch specific stratagems, like Brotherhood of Veterans, and all the anti-Xenos ones really need a complete overhaul in the light of our Army of Renown, Zone Nephilim and all the new Xenos Codex releases. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have looked at how to spend our command points now that Zone Nephilim has severely cut their availability both pre and early game. In the Army of Renown in particular, I think one main consideration will always be when and how many times to use Specialism Extremis, and I think even though it is a fantastic stratagem, it should not lock us out of too many of our great pre-game picks. Personally, I feel comfortable going with 1 starting CP, given that I tend to play defensively and I plan around using Extremis only once. This allows me to take at least the Beacon and Chalice, 2 Warlord traits and the Chaplain's Wise Orator, and I then usually take either Selfless Healer for the Apothecary, Oathkeeper for the Judiciar, or the Tomb if I'm taking neither character. During the game, I would focus on keeping CP for Transhuman, the obligatory command reroll, and Deathwatch specific ones like Fall Back and Shoot, Fall Back and Charge, or the Black Shield allowing the Proteus kill team to heroically intervene. Particularly during later battle rounds, keep in mind that we can redeploy with the Phobos or the Army of Renown teleport strat, which can come in handy. Anything I happen to have extra, I sometimes blow in Brotherhood of Veterans or Uncompromising Fire, but I prefer not to if I can avoid it. This has by no means been a complete or exclusive list of stratagems, but rather a glimpse of how I prioritize CP on a grander scale. So that's it for spending your command points wisely in the Deathwatch. How do these CP changes affect your own lists, and what do you usually end up spending your CP on, both pre and during the game? Have I forgotten any important stratagems, or done injustice to spending CP properly? Let me know in the comments. Finally, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page where I will be posting links to my videos as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. I do also have a Patreon page. If you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated as it helps me invest into future videos. As always, thank you very much for watching, guys. Your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video. Give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.